Hello and welcome to the Blue Nose Bias. I'm Sean Jodry.
I'm Josh Fraser.
Today we're talking about a social movement that's been predominantly featured in the mainstream media over the past couple of weeks, although its coverage has been kind of disjointed and in a lot of ways inaccurate, I would say. Of course, what I'm referring to is the Idle No More movement, which is quite frankly a grassroots movement, which consists predominantly of indigenous people across this country, despite the fact a lot of the issues they're talking about really do affect and are relevant to all Canadians.
They've got a big emphasis on a lot of environmental issues, and for that reason, I mean, they've got several platforms, but there's one part I really agree with, and it's definitely the environmental issues.
One of the main points around this is the fact the federal government is not sticking to its treaty obligations, which is to consult the First Nations people, indigenous people across this country, when making decisions on environmental or other issues that affect them directly. So these big omnibus bills, Bill C-45 and C-38, see significant changes both to the relationship between the federal government and indigenous peoples in the country, as well as to environmental issues as well. One of the big things about this is it reduces the federal government's involvement in protecting waterways, rivers, and so on and so forth, as well as fisheries. But really, though, at the heart of this sort of grassroots movement is the fact that the federal government and the indigenous people, the relationship there is just completely broken. There's a lack of trust between the indigenous people of this country and the federal government because of, hundreds of years of the federal government essentially trying to wipe them out.
Yeah, no, there's a really bad history, more than you'd kind of think in Canada, more than the average person would think if
But
you
they
haven't
don't
studied.
teach it. That's the thing. I was never taught about residential schools.
I was taught a little bit. No, maybe not quite as much as quite as much as we should.
Yeah.
But I did hear about the indigenous issues, and it didn't even focus on the negative. It went more. My education in middle school was more to do with the way of life and stuff like that, and I find it's a really productive way to go about it.
Well, I mean, the federal government has very much tried to distance itself from the whole residential school.
It's made apologies, as big governing bodies will do, but it really hasn't been fully addressed.
One of the big changes with these omnibus bills, or one of them specifically, is it makes it a lot easier for these, for just a small group of people on these reserves to sell off land that is on the reserves. So a lot of critics are saying that this is going to make it a lot easier for the government to get that pipeline from Alberta over to BC because they only need, 10 or so people who all vote in favor of a project to sell the land and get it through.
And the good news about this, and Rick Mercer always does these kinds of things whenever there's some kind of turbulence in the system and it's kind of been addressed like this. I'm saying it's really healthy for Canada that this is actually happening. There's one political move made. Yes, it was very it was done without the consultation of the Aboriginal people, but they're coming forward and they're actually having their issues addressed. They did get a meeting with Prime Minister Harper eventually.
Yeah, but they shouldn't have to. They shouldn't have to go through something like this in order to be respected or addressed.
No, I'm saying from a very optimistic standpoint that at least they're talking. At least we're seeing because there's worry there that they weren't going to talk for a while.
No, but here's the thing: they've been talking for the past, couple hundred years. I mean, nothing significant has been addressed. I mean, these indigenous people, a lot of them, especially in the north, are still living in absolutely abysmal conditions. You see, the federal government has consistently, regardless of who's in power, tried to dismantle these indigenous nations. So that's one of the reasons that there's such a lack of trust between these people and the federal government.
I'm just more encouraged at the fact that they're actually talking. I mean, I know they've been talking for a long time, but if they ever stop talking, because right now we've got I don't know more protesters across the country who are stirring things up, and I think they should be. I think they should be getting everyone to be involved in this kind of thing. But I don't know more is not the same as, and that's part of the problem. I don't know more is not the same as the people who are going to meet with the government. There's a division there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, a lot of the people, let's talk about the fact that a lot of the people who are involved in this Idle No More movement are young people. And the statistics of First Nation, of Indigenous people across Canada is significantly different from the average Canadian. So? Well, it's really interesting because the median age of Indigenous Canadians is 27.
It's what?
27. Whereas the median age for non-Aboriginal people in Canada is 40.
No kidding.
So that's a significant difference, and what that shows is the fact that there's a lot of young people out there of Indigenous heritage who are looking for opportunities and looking at the federal government and how their people have been treated for the past couple hundred years and saying, you know what, this isn't acceptable. What's also big is the fact that Indigenous people are becoming much more educated and having more opportunities than they have in the past, which is why you see a lot of very, very intelligent people coming out and saying this is not acceptable. I've had some opportunities, but that doesn't mean the rest of my people have. So they're coming out and demanding equal treatment, essentially, as the rest of Canadians.
And I think it's important that their concerns be addressed. And I think what the most encouraging thing for me is that Idle No More is providing a mouthpiece for environmental concerns. I mean, Aboriginal issues, I think we should get those, I think we should get to the point where we're dealing with Aboriginal issues on a level that there's communication, there's actually things being done, there's something being accomplished.
You can't with the current government.
That's a really strong opinion.
Well, the thing is, a lot of these protesters, a lot of these Indigenous people aren't necessarily on the side of the chiefs either, because in a lot of cases, these chiefs have been working with the federal government to sell off resources and land and so on and so forth in favor of those chiefs. So the reason I think you see a lot of these chiefs sprouting forward and coming to action now is because of the fact they realize that the people that they represent are paying attention and they're annoyed, just like all politicians. Whenever politicians see people who actually care about something, they tend to be a little more, willing to listen and actually do something. So,
and we're not at a solution yet. We aren't really even that close. I hope we're close, but we're not that close to a solution yet. And but I'm very encouraged that the system's actually working. There are people talking, regardless of how effective you think they are. Yeah, people are actually talking right now, and that's fine with me.
I have a hard time seeing the Harper government making any significant and substantive changes.
Do you think they'll get to the point where he has no choice?
That's valid. That very well might be. He might realize that, wow, we really do have to address this because a lot of these people are shutting down the roads, and they are shutting down our economy in a lot of cases.
And it is legal in Canada to do so. I mean, sometimes they're disrupting rail lines and stuff like that, and it's you kind of wonder sometimes when you're walking a very fine line when you're doing a political movement like that. But it is legal to protest in Canada.
Thank you very much for watching. This is obviously a massive topic.
There's plenty of news sources out there. Get on the internet, get some information, and have an opinion on this thing. It's an important thing for the future of Canada to have an opinion on what's going on with this. And we're talking human rights, and we're talking Canadian rights.
Be sure to subscribe to the channel to keep up to date on the latest videos.
Also, make sure to follow us on Twitter at BlueNoseBias to make sure you keep up on all the discussion.
And check us out on Facebook as well as BlueNoseBias.ca. Also, be sure to check us out on Symmetry, the Symmetry Public Relations blog. You can find some of our videos on there as well as some other really great articles.
I've been reading through some articles the past few weeks and stuff like that. I love hearing the perspectives on Symmetry.
Thank you very much for watching. I'm Sean Jodry.
I'm Josh Fraser.
And we'll catch you next week.